Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the second part of our Western Connecticut UFO Conference 2022 on Saturday. We have Paul and Ben Eno, Behind the Paranormal radio co-hosts, hosts, and father-son paranormal investigators and good friends of mine and the conference. We welcome them this morning for their presentation, Time Storms, Portals to High Strangeness. So without further ado, I will give the con to Paul and Ben. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, thanks for having us, Aurelio. Always a pleasure to be at the Western Connecticut UFO Conference.
Indeed, and thank you, Aurelio. Well, time storm, it's a funny term. I doubt that many in the audience have ever heard it before. And we call it portals to high strangeness. This is a term that we'll explain in a bit, but let's just kind of begin to look at what these things are. All right. Huh. All right. May 22nd, 1966, Antarctica. A brilliantly lit cloud at about 600 feet shoots, quote, a black beam toward the ground, then rises rapidly. And this was witnessed and photographed by Eric Wilkinson and members of the British Antarctic Survey. Wilkinson said the cloud emitted a thick black ray of light, and you can see it right there, right down, and you can see the turbulence it's causing on the ice. And at an angle of about 45 degrees, and churned up a snow devil, which is the same thing as a dust devil, kind of like a little tornado thing. So really weird. What the heck is that? July 28th, 1974, Somerset, England. After a heavy electrical storm, Peter Williamson vanishes from sight in a brilliant flash of light. He was found 3 days later, unconscious in a locked garden nearby. He remembered visiting a parallel world where he had a different life, remembered names from the hospital he was taken to, etc. January 20th, 1988, a Nullarbor plane in Australia. Forgive my voice, by the way, I'm just getting over my traditional October allergy attack. The Knowles family encountered a glowing cloud-like UFO, like an egg in an egg cup, quote unquote, which chased them and even lifted their car off the road, dropping it so heavily that a tire burst. This thing came out of a cloud-like substance on a perfectly clear day. During the height of this encounter, they said their voices became distorted and sounded like they were in slow motion. They said they drove at speeds of up to 200 kilometers an hour, that the car was covered inside and out by a black ash, and that the UFO landed on the roof, leaving dents. The object, quote, hummed like a transformer. And there is a phenomenon that is rather common, and cars driving into strange fogs and mists. I've actually talked to people to whom this has happened. There will turn out to be missing time, sounds of electrical humming or static, instant transit of miles, sometimes hundreds of miles, in a minute or two, if that. Occupants feeling heat and tingling skin, etc. There are hundreds of reports from all over the world. Ben, if you want to jump in here, just jump in.
Well, it brings to mind, the traditional stories of, the Bermuda Triangle, as we're going to bring up, with planes flying into these electrical storms, quote unquote.
Yeah, that's an area where this is pretty well known, and I've actually been there. When I was in the Coast Guard, I was at sea, and we kind of double dip with my military duties and the paranormal. That's a long story, but today I'd probably get in trouble. But at the
Also
time,
a pretty good pun, considering you were in the Coast Guard.
Right. Excellent, Ben. So here's the electronic cloud of December 1970. It was between Andros Island in the Bahamas and Miami, Florida. Bruce Grennan Jr., who's still kicking, and we'll talk about this if you ask him, flying in a private aircraft. It was a Beechcraft Bonanza, as I recall, flying with his dad. He reported flying into an electronic cloud. And he kind of called it that because of what it did to the radio signal. It was all static and distorted. And this cloud congealed all around them. It was in the kind of a donut shape, as you can see from the graphic, which is actually quite accurate. And it had a rotating hole in the middle. It seemed to punch through to clear weather on the other side. In actual time, their plane covered a distance of 150 kilometers in 3 minutes. And that is, the plane increased speed to would have had to be 3,000 kilometers an hour, which obviously was impossible. And this speed was higher than the fastest fighter aircraft at the time. Only spacecraft could travel that quickly, in space. So this was a real mystery. Now, they did get to Miami, Florida, because they just flew out of this thing, but they never figured out what it was. To us, it was a time storm. And now here's none of this is anything new. We have the stories of the Anunnaki, etc. Weird stuff coming out of clouds from the ancient stories. There's Anu, who was the big cheese among the Anunnaki in Sumerian literature. And his name even comes from the Sumerian word for sky. So you've got a lot of strange things happening in the human experience, and many of them involve these what we today might call a time storm. The Indian gods were always coming out of clouds and doing this sort of thing. Again, it's nothing new. And certainly in the Bible, and I spent a lot of years in the seminary, doesn't mean I know what I'm talking about with this, but because we didn't study this sort of thing. But weird stuff coming out of clouds during storms, nothing new again. Pillar of cloud, the fire of Exodus. As a matter of fact, I've counted over 300 incidents in the Bible, Old Testament and New, with some sort of object or cloud flying, hovering, landing, this sort of thing. And, you can have a wide interpretation, but obviously this is some sort of aerial / meteorological phenomenon.
There was a biblical scholar who, I guess there's a theory that the pillar of fire was actually lightning, and the way it was translated came out as pillar of fire, when I believe I could be incorrect. It might have been from the ancient Hebrew, where the word for lightning was translated in that way into the Greek, and the Greeks just said, all right, pillar of fire, done.
Yeah. Well, the mistranslations will get carried over and over. Regardless, it certainly was a meteorological or some sort of phenomenon, but to direct a meteorological phenomenon like lightning to zap only Egyptians, I mean, that we need to discuss that further.
That's true.
Now, I don't know about the weather on this day, but it was probably significant because this is the first example of a time slip in America, at least as far as Europeans were concerned. In this year, this is a quote, in this year, one James Everell, a sober, discreet man, and 2 others saw a great light in the night at Muddy River. Now this is just off Boston. The Muddy River, I think, still exists, but you can't find it. I mean, it's highways all over it and all that. When it stood still, not the river, the light, it flamed up and was about 3 yards square. When it ran, it was contracted into the figure of a swine, a pig. It ran as swift as an arrow towards Charlton, which is today Charlestown, and so up and down for about 2 or 3 hours. They were coming down in their lighter, that's a little boat, about a mile, and when it was over, they found themselves carried quite back against the tide to the place they came from. So I interpret this as a time slip. Diverse other credible persons saw the same light after about the same place. And this is written by Governor Winthrop, who received this report. Nobody really explained this, but nevertheless, I don't know, he didn't report on the weather at the time, but I suspect there might have been some sort of atmospheric disturbance or something we might have interpreted as a time storm. Not that that's present at every example of high strangeness, as we call it today. MUFON doesn't like to say paranormal anymore. But it's one of those things that I think that we wish we had more information about today. So time storms. And here's pretty much the coiner of the term, British researcher Jenny Randles. She also came up with the Oz factor, which is a term we hear, describing the odd state of consciousness involving changes to the perception of time and space, during which strange phenomena and close encounters can occur. We coined the term Leinster effect. It's a little different, but it pretty much means the same thing as the Oz factor, with a couple of caveats. So time storms, during many experiences of high strangeness, and sometimes not noticed because witnesses are dazzled by the UFOs, the cryptids, or the entities, there is a strange energy cloud and or weather event. These can provoke a series of physical effects ranging from tingling skin to dizziness, and Ben and I have both experienced this, smells, gravity anomalies, slips in space, and they might include the loss of time, minutes, hours, or even days. There can even be consciousness shifts to other times and places for you or for whomever or whatever it is you're experiencing. Now, one of our longstanding theories is that when you're having a high strangeness or paranormal experience, including UFO experiences, we're dealing with parallel worlds, a la quantum mechanics and the MWI, the multiple worlds interpretation thereof. So that when you're experiencing these things, you and whatever you're experiencing are kind of halfway into each other's worlds across the membranes or brains, BRANES, as a physicist might say. That's our working theory, and it really seems to work for us in our own investigations. Hopefully we're not doing confirmation bias. But in any case, this is pretty much what we're talking about. So this stuff about a dark and stormy night is true. So if it's a dark and stormy night, there's a reason for that. Ben, you have a lot of expertise in sound.
I suppose. Well, I suppose I
How would a
do.
dark and stormy night affect sound and infrasound and all that? But
I mean, it might. There's a lot to thunder that, you know, it's. I'm trying to formulate the thought. So it's
well, let's go a couple of slides and then you can comment.
I'll formulate the thought.
Okay. All right. So, all right. So all this we've said, so what? Lightning, the electromagnetic effects of lightning are well documented. The ongoing research keeps refining those findings. VLF are very low frequency waves generated by lightning discharges propagate in the Earth's ionosphere. Waveguide, or the EIWG, and this is a scientific journal reference to this. In our own research, VLF waves can cause the perception of paranormal phenomena, or open membranes, as we just said, between parallel worlds to allow what we call paranormal phenomena to take place, including slips in time and space. As an example, in our own house, Ben, I think you were like 4 or 5 in Rhode Island. Ben's older brother had a fish tank, and all of a sudden, I'll tell you the connection to that in a second. But one night, my wife and I woke up to a shaking bed, and then I went out into the hallway, and it was like there was an electrical tingle, much as we've described in Time Storm, all over me. And this is familiar to us in cases. And so I took my own advice. I assumed this isn't necessarily, excuse me, high strangeness going on. This is some sort of maybe it's something natural. And sure enough, my EMF meter, my electromagnetic field meter, picked up a huge magnetic field coming out of Ben's older brother's fish tank. I guess he never cleaned it. I don't know, there must have been some huge reaction going on. It led me right to that. It was putting out like 2,000 milligauss, which is high enough to cause a health hazard. So we dumped the pump for the filter. All phenomena ceased immediately. So to me, this was an example of the VLF waves, standing wave getting stuck in a house.
Well, I think it's very important to point out that when we refer to very low frequency, it is inaudible to the human ear. The human ear can only hear between 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz, and that's really only when you're an infant, because as soon as you begin to grow, your hearing cells in your ears start to die. So if you ever hear ringing in your ears, it's not someone speaking ill of you, it is your hearing cells dying. And that's why the tone always changes as time goes on. So if you start to notice that your ear is ringing and it sounds different than the last time, it's because that very specific frequency you can no longer hear. Because in there, I believe there's 40,000 little hairs when you are initially born, and then each one can hear a very specific frequency. So as time goes on, you can no longer hear those. So there was always a little joke that we would play in high school, or well, I wouldn't, Dad. But some people back in the day, you could get these ringtones that they were marketed as adults can't hear these. So so these kids would have these ringtones go off in the middle of class, and sure enough, any of the older teachers, probably over the age of like 50, maybe early 60s, couldn't hear it, but they would strike out with anybody under the age of 40. So they'd say, okay, who's making the noise, whatever. But anybody over that, they couldn't hear it. And so we were like, wow, it's magic. And no, it's not. It's that they couldn't hear it. So with very low frequency sound waves, these aren't heard so much as they are felt. So they do have an effect by creating a resonance, in the environment. So if anybody here plays an instrument, guitar, drums, anything like that, if you play a certain chord or a certain string or a certain note, it'll rattle different objects in the room. Usually you'll hear it in like a snare drum or something like that. It'll start to rattle because for whatever reason, that a portion of that frequency cannot pass through that object. So there's sort of this idea that the thicker an object is, sound can either travel faster and the thinner it is, the slower it travels. So when it's when it's cold out, you can hear things for miles because the air molecules are thicker. So you can hear sound traveling through for miles. It's same with very low frequencies. They travel really fast in thicker environments. So when you hear these stories of the military having these sonic weapons on submarines, they can travel vast distances in a short period of time because it is the water is thicker than air, obviously. So with these very low frequency sounds, they can resonate and create feedback loops. So if you have a perfectly square room and you have a speaker or some sort of generator that can generate a very low frequency, you can potentially create a feedback loop, because if the material is just right and it happens to not be able to pass through that material, then bada bing, bada boom, you can create, an earthquake or something akin to that by having this very low frequency just bouncing back and forth and just getting more and more intense as time goes on.
So the real question, particularly regarding time storms, is does everything Ben has described create the illusion of high strangeness, or does it actually open doors or membranes, as we say, to parallel worlds where this high strangeness can be encountered and experienced? We tend to, I hate to sound like what is it? Ancient alien theorists say yes, but I think we're going to say yes to what we just said, that we've got actual phenomena going. I mean, when something lands and comes out and grabs you and pulls you in, obviously that's probably a little more than just experiencing it. It's something that seems to be real. So the related phenomena, this is a quote from only last year, two Scandinavian scientists researching this sort of thing. Our research shows how electromagnetism is an inherent property of space-time itself. In a way, space-time itself is therefore the ether. Electric and magnetic fields represent certain local tensions or twists in the space-time fabric. Something to think about. So there are caveats here. VLF waves, as Ben just described, generated by lightning discharges, can affect the atmosphere for hundreds of miles. In our experience, all high strangeness phenomena are time related. They may not be associated necessarily with obvious time storms, but they are time related. We'll get into that in a minute. Now, is that distant thunderstorm why you met Bigfoot on the golf course that day and why you both eventually got soaked? Well, maybe and maybe not. More clues. In folklore. Now, folklore, as we've often said, is the vessel of the memory of the human race. It's based on stuff that really happened to our remote ancestors or not so remote ancestors, and it became ingrained in our psyche. So here we have storm watchers, part of the folklore. They're supposedly the ghosts of people who died during storms, and they turn up to help people caught in storms. One of the most dramatic examples of this was in Joplin, Missouri, some years ago, when, not that many years ago, when there were the terrible tornadoes that occurred, and children reported being saved by butterfly people. They called them the butterfly people. They had huge wings. They were very colorful, and they protected children during this terrible tornado that pretty much wrecked the town. So I know, so this might not be just folklore. I know of 3 nursing homes where staff claimed to have seen shadow people, with respect to Heidi Hollis, who invented that term, walking the halls during thunderstorms. So again, do these storms facilitate, not necessarily create, but facilitate, make easy the combining of worlds so we can experience what we would call paranormal phenomena or high strangeness. Now here's some more clues regarding UFOs or UAPs. That's the new term, as you undoubtedly know, unidentified aerial phenomena. At the top, we have Brazil near Rio, February 2015. Looks like an object up there feeding off the lightning. One of the things our Mr. Shelley had asked about previously, and may again, once he hears this. The bottom one, we have the Kimberley District of Western Australia, February 2019. This is from a police cam in a police cruiser. There were craft reflections. Are these craft? Are they reflections? Are they wormholes, intersect points, or time storms, or all of the above? Now, it's not just UFOs that will turn up during these weather phenomena. California, 2017. We've checked into this photo. We believe it's legitimate, and excuse me. And we have what appears to be a upright cryptid here, Sasquatch sort of thing. Now, the one in the bottom is tongue in cheek because our friend Lauren Coleman, who is probably the dean of the cryptozoological research, has a museum in Portland, Maine, the International Cryptozoology Museum. And he's got a model of the Loch Ness Monster out in front. And we thought that this was a precious photo because if you recall, a few years ago, there was a terrible storm that hit Maine, and you had a couple of feet of water in the streets here. And we thought this was pretty cool, this photo. Well, we're not saying that's really big. Ghosts and poltergeists, all part of high strangeness. This shot is supposedly from the Enfield poltergeist in England. I guess the Conjuring 3 film that has to do with this case. or was it 2, Ben? I don't know.
It might be 3.
Yeah, well, whichever. I know for a fact because I was working with Ed and Lorraine Warren at that time. They went to England after the case was all over. They did not participate. I haven't seen the movie, and I suppose I'll have to. There were frequent electrical storms in many of the cases I was involved with, like this. So, is there a connection or is it a coincidence? I'll look back over cases in a minute, and we'll see what you might think about that question. Okay, now we get the storm part, but where does the time come in? Well, we all experience time as the progression of events from the past through the present and into the future. We experience causes leading to effects. In our consciousness, anyway, we remember the past, but not the future. And the movement of time appears to be forward, continuous, and irreversible. According to modern physics, however, none of that is real. Albert Einstein's special theory of relativity revealed that the experience of the flow of time is relative to us, the observer, and our situation. You know, you may, if you're bored to death by this lecture, it's going to seem longer. If you're absolutely dying with fascination, then it's going to seem quicker. You know, you go to work, maybe you have a boring day, it's going to be seem slower, and et cetera. The work of quantum physicists has essentially proven that all time is happening simultaneously. And we find that in high strangeness cases. There is no past and no future, just an eternal now. This is present not only in the thinking of many quantum physicists, but also in the traditions of many ancient religions. Now, when it comes to understanding high strangeness, that changes everything. Suppose that entities, including quote unquote gods, aliens, or whoever, know all this and can use it to manipulate and even travel through time. So maybe time storms open the portals of intersect points or rip open membrane. Now, here's a book about this, the only book written about this that I know of. Jenny Randles published her book on this subject in 2001. I read it the following year, and it was an awakening. As I look back over, ghosts, aliens, poltergeists, and exorcisms, and even back to my first cases. Now, here we are in 1971. Believe it or not, that's me in there at the far right of the bottom picture. There were also the Village of Voices in Pomfret, Connecticut, right in your own state, Danbury, and you can see, not near Danbury, but it's in Connecticut. Multiple bizarre phenomena. We expected dead people, and we got time slips. I've written about that in numerous places and talked about it on numerous episodes of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. There was thundering and lightning in the distance. We had relatively decent weather, but there was thunder and lightning in the distance. On the night we encountered the mutterers, as I call it. There, this particular fellow here on the left, Marcel, was walking up toward this. This is our second trip. We had spent a lot of time that mapped it. We knew where everything was, even in the dark. And here he was walking up toward this cemetery. We were probably about over here. The cemetery was literally gone. We had spotlights, it wasn't there. And all of a sudden he stopped and he began to have what I interpreted as a health episode. And remember that this is the early 70s, no cell phones. We were cut off from the world. And were he having a heart attack or something, would have been a serious problem. So we're there, and he literally could not be moved. Several of us pulled him forward and to the left. He could not be moved, but he could move freely back and to the right in the direction that was sort of opposite the cemetery. So we were literally flummoxed here. He all of a sudden leaned over and began to cry. You had to know this guy. This was not him. Onto his walking stick, and he was sobbing. And he felt he didn't want to ruin it for the rest of us, but he felt we should not go to the cemetery that night. It wasn't there anyway. All of a sudden, that's when we heard the mutterers. there was a group of men speaking in low voices, not more than 20 feet away from us, in the direction of the cemetery. Now, all of a sudden, we just didn't know what to do. We weren't really frightened. There was this electrical tingle all over our bodies. And the question arises, looking back on it with the time storm's perspective, and there was thunder and lightning in the distance. Were we in a time slip? Was the cemetery not there because we were partially in a world where it hadn't been really established yet? Were we perhaps attending in a time sense, the first funeral that had ever taken place there in the late 1700s? We couldn't tell what these men were saying, but you can hear people muttering. You know it's in English, but you don't necessarily know what they're saying. This was very, very weird. And from day one, there was a tradition or a rumor among the people of this village that cemetery was haunted. Were we the first quote unquote ghosts experienced by people in that village at that cemetery? With time storms, that might very well have been true. Really, really bizarre concept, but I think that's absolutely plausible. Now here we are, October of 1973. Another example, the exorcism of Barbara. I was a seminary student studying for the priesthood at a nearby seminary. I was assisting a priest who was the exorcist for the Diocese of Ogdensburg, New York. And I was rather surprised they let me do this. I was only 21 years old. But there were some thunderstorms and strange lights over nearby St. Lawrence River and Thousand Islands area of that beautiful section of New York and Ontario, Canada. And there were all sorts of reports of the lights from among the patients we were working with. And another long story about it, but some of the things that happened might very well have been connected with time storms because of the weather going on in the area at the time. Now here are examples of my notes. I was not allowed to take notes during these exorcisms, but I was I would go back to the seminary and I would type them out. Even then I had terrible handwriting. So these are examples of people who had seen strange lights and little figures by their bed who were subject of exorcisms. And I went to the priest, Father Lawrence, and I said, what is going on here? And he said, well, don't pay any attention to the reports of the lights and stuff, because, these people are essentially, inmates at a state hospital. So you really can't trust what they say about them. So I kind of bought that, but, I later on looked back as it was a mistake not to consider that. So one of the things going on at the time were highly charged electrical phenomena in the upper atmosphere. And you could see that this was possibly related to the time storms. And of course, it's the Aurora Borealis. We were in, again, northern New York, right on the Canadian border. We'd go out at night sometimes and look up, just lie on the dock. The school had a dock going out into the river, and you could watch these beautiful lights in the sky. And this is a highly electromagnetic event, may have been connected with some of the phenomena. And then, of course, there's dear old N. Lorraine Warren, I was working with from 1972 to 1978, because they thought some of the theories I had at the time were pretty nifty. And the they're well known from the Conjuring film 2013. And some of the cases in this chapter of the books I've written, and Ben and I have written, involve them as well. I would love to talk to them today. They're both gone, to find out what the weather phenomena were. What are the cases? And nobody thought to keep track of this at the time. That's unfortunate. Believe it or not, that's me in the Orthodox seminary during those same years. Now, November 74, the Bridgeport, Connecticut poltergeist cases was forgotten for 40 years, become quite famous. It's all over the Travel Channel lately. Ben and I are the documentaries.
Mhm.
Possibly the best documented, the most witnessed poltergeist attack in history. And there's me again as Father Bill Charbonneau and Lorraine Warren. And here are some of the really bizarre things. And anybody who lives in the Danbury area, that this is certainly near you, because it occurred in Bridgeport, not too far from Danbury, really, relatively speaking. And the police report seeing all sorts of bizarre phenomena. Here's just an example. Joseph Tomek, Carl Leonti, George Wilson, Leroy Lawson observed one or more of the following happen. The refrigerator rises approximately 6 inches off the floor. I saw that myself. A 21-inch portable TV set in the living room rise off a table and turn around. Furniture move away from the wall and fall over. Objects on shelves and hanging from the wall start vibrating. And also, I was hit by a flying television set and hurt rather badly. I saw all kinds of bizarre things. I had a physical confrontation with what we were interpreting as a demon. I later thought it was something entirely different, but the weather was unsettled outside. Now, whether that's connected, I don't know, but I look back on it and I think of the possible time storm connection, and there you had it.
It was a dark and stormy night.
Indeed. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a reason why people, believe that. So now here is some of the press coverage of this poltergeist and all this, and it was kind of cold. On the Monday night of the case, when I was in the house with the family, the Warrens had gone off to do some TV show or something. Four of these things attacked, and it got so bad in there we had to leave the house, and it was sleeting. I didn't hear any thunder or lightning, but it was kind of foggy and sleeting. So whether that's connected, I don't know. And here's the little girl Marcy, who seemed to be the center of that phenomenon. And again, even indoors, you hear about time storm sorts of phenomena, even indoors. And here we have, and I've circled this area of kind of a mist or a fog that was in the house. And these things, they didn't look like this, but they felt like it when I pushed against one, were coming out of this mist. So here's an example of, there wasn't any thunder and lightning. Here's an example of possible time storm type phenomena going on indoors. Ozone smell, tingling skin, alien presence. Because these things were more alien than anything else. I write about that and talk about it elsewhere. And here we are on the Travel Channel, a little bit of self-promotion, talking about these things. Now, time storms, again, they're not essential for high strangeness to occur, but they appear to make it more likely. As we said earlier, they do tend to facilitate the passage of energy and even inhabitants back and forth among what we interpret as parallel worlds. Ben, you want to add something in here?
Well, I guess it's important to realize that there's a real multiplicity that's going on in the phenomena. I think we're tended to just focus on one thing at a time, like, oh, there was a Bigfoot sighting here, therefore this is a Bigfoot place, or there are UFOs here, it's a UFO place, when really there's many layers to what's going on, and it's never as easy as we like to think that it is to explain.
Okay. Well, when I sort of stumbled on the time storms concept, I'd already been working in the paranormal for 30 years. And again, I thought back over our old cases, and our most significant cases, especially the ones we specialize in today as a team, are what we refer to as flap areas, areas of high strangeness that involve intense activity of many different kinds, not necessarily associated with one another. Ghost phenomena, UFOs, cryptids, but we think they are related because of the temporal and spatial weirdness that's going on in these areas. Now here's portals and intersect to and from where and when, the multiverse idea. And there we go. And the multiverse, an open system with exchange of energy among worlds and probable exchange of inhabitants too. Multiverse experiences to us mean paranormal experiences. We don't know any other way to explain them. All right, now here's just a very simple sort of illustration, and it's more complex than this, but physicists describe a space-time foam, FOAM, that had occurred at the creation of the Big Bang, or whatever you want to call it, at the beginning of the universe. Not only was matter created, which is really just another form of energy, but also all these different simultaneously existing worlds that are right next to each other. We've got, here's one of the UFOs, perhaps a parasite. Here's where it's still 1910. Yeah, this is an example of all simultaneous worlds, as we said earlier, time not really existing. And here are some photographic examples that we believe illustrates this. Here is a lady in the Maryland area, and this was sent to me by a friend of mine who was a reporter with the Baltimore Sun. Because when they threw me out of the seminary for doing this stuff, I ended up in journalism in the late 1970s, and I've had a very rewarding career in newspapers and magazines since then. But she sent this to me, and you can see right through the guy's hand to where she took these pictures herself, and you can see right through the guy's arm to some of his equipment behind. She was doing a story on this lady who was a concentration camp survivor, and she was following her through her day to do a feature on her. And here is this optometrist, and the first question my hard-nosed reporter friend asked me was, could this guy be an angel? So I said, well, I'm sure he's very nice, but he's a licensed optometrist in the state of Maryland. So I don't think, but a very, very strange photographic phenomenon, but not to us. In our opinion, this illustrates a membrane passing through a membrane here. And in one of the worlds, the doctor is not sitting there. And another one he is. He caught it right in between. Might be just that simple. Here's another example. This is from our Flap area case. Mark has been involved in that case. He hasn't been to the site yet, but we've been working on it since 2016. And here's some of our people we've been working with. And there's poor old Remy the dog with his butt disappearing. And this area is full of all kinds of weird stuff, and possibly associated with that, the time problem. And here are flap areas where we've been investigating. And with COVID, it really put a damper on the ability to travel, but we're still kind of working on this. Ohio Valley, where the Mothman stuff took place in the 60s. Bridgewater Triangle of Massachusetts, which is really quite close to where we live. Litchfield County, your own vicinity there. And working with that Shane Searway and Mark D'Antonio and Lori Greer. Pennsylvania Triangle, Rendlesham Forest, England, Tyler County, Texas, and the Big Thicket. Stay tuned for more on that. But there are all sorts of phenomena that can be associated with time storms. So a typical flap area phenomena, nightly UFOs, you can read through this. You name it, it goes on. Waking visions, people have bizarre psychic experiences. And for example, in that case in Pomfret, Connecticut, where we had the thunder and lightning in the distance and the mutterers and all that weird stuff, the guy was having, who had never experienced it before, was having all sorts of vivid impressions and this sort of thing after, while that was going on. Pennsylvania Triangle here, and this will get into some interesting stuff. Now here is a drone shot, and this is a place where, you name it, it's going on. And there are always storms, or with every single time we've been there, there's been at least one day with storms going on. And there are 3 Bigfoot sightings just within the purview of this photograph. Mine, right there, September 16th, 2016. And another one down in here by Shane Searway. That was that same trip only, no, actually, that was the previous May. And then another one over here by a little girl who was scared to death, broad daylight, huge Bigfoot, brown fur sort of thing. She was coming home from school and scared to death. Won't talk to us to this day about it.
I think it's really important to point out how small of an area this is and how
Yeah.
active it is.
Yes. So this is just one of the initial reports and of, everything that's going on down there. Is a track we found. And this is a picture I took myself of strange lights right on the ground. Or near the ground. Near Du Bois, Pennsylvania, May 20th, 2016. Strange lights near the ground. And here's another, remember that beam in Antarctica that was reported? Well, here's a beam coming out of the sky. I saw this myself. And strange lights. And strange lights here. Now, here's the real clincher when it comes to time storm. So this is May 24th, 25th, 2019. Was this a time storm? We would have seen this UAP. Would we have seen this UAP without those thunderstorms? And this is witnessed by Shane Searway, Chuck Credo from the Seacoast Saucers, several local people, and Mark, I should say Alexander Petikoff, the well-known young filmmaker, who I believe has spoken at this conference. Now, on the left is the storm that was going on to the north of this area. Let me just get my notes here and make sure I get it right. And the storm on the right was taking place to the east. Now, the funny thing is that where we were was absolutely crystal clear. Now, this doesn't look it, but this is an infrared picture. So, and this was about the size of maybe a $50. Remember what those are to the naked eye. But these storms that were going on, you could see almost heat lightning, and it was odd because it wasn't that hot. It was, as I say, it was in May, late May, but it was, you could see the lightning in the clouds, but it was very isolated. And we did not see any of this near us. It was, again, off in the distance in two different directions. So would we have seen this were it not for if these were time storms? I've never seen one that's more like that. I'll show you the entire video. And I'm sorry about the Blair Witch Project style cinematography, but now those are stars. I was running to try and get a good shot, and here it is. Kind of crossing the sky. And what's odd, you see the darker than dark sort of underneath it. And again, this lightning was going on. And from I probably shouldn't be doing that. Yeah. And then it kind of changed shape or turned, and that object came out of it and went back into it again. And went down behind a tree, and here we were. All right, so let me get, wait a minute. Let's see if I can get beyond this one. All right, let me all right. Let's see if I can close this off and then start again. Okay. Now additionally, we have another possible case here in Pennsylvania, a lot of weird stuff going on in Tioga County, which we consider part of this triangle case, this flap area. So stay tuned on that. So here's a hint for researchers. Look around you. Note all conditions, weather, physical reactions of experiencers, and other phenomena, stuff they very often don't consider, even if these things are seemingly unrelated, because they probably are related. And again, it's a whole new world. Nothing is what it appears to be. Everything you know is wrong, and it's the first day of school. All right, so I think we've gone a little over here. I'm sorry about that. But if we'd like to, and this is some of our own books, and here's our radio show. You're welcome. We'll be on tomorrow at noon. We broadcast live from the conference here last week, and it was a pretty good show with Peter Robbins. And thank you all. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Aurelio, for having me.
Thank you. And you have Peter on for tomorrow, correct? Again,
Peter Robbins, yes.
excellent. And it's going to be about advertising, right? And UFOs and
Yeah,
marketing.
unusual show.
That should be really interesting.
Yeah,
I think that's
images,
really interesting. I think that's really
Yeah.
interesting, you know.
UFO imagery and advertising.
I think that's a whole new market.
Absolutely.
So we have some questions from some folks. Hey, folks, if you have some questions, we have some time because Tom Reed's presentation will not begin until 1 p.m. So we got some time to ask some questions of Paul and Ben. Let me see here. We have one from Peter. Paul, in the beginning, you mentioned you have talked to people who have gone into the clouds of high strangeness. What cases are involved?
Well, the one that really stands out is there was a case in Virginia, and this had happened to the people in 1979, and which was a strange year in my life. And it they said they and their family had left the Richmond area and were headed for North Carolina to see relatives. They said they drove into a fog. They had the experiences much like the people in Australia did, strange tingling all over their bodies. Time seemed a little bit funny. And they turned up in northern North Carolina in a matter of minutes, when it should have taken 2 hours. And all the paint was missing from their car. Pretty annoying in itself, but that was one case. I talked to a couple I actually did two couples in Scotland by phone. And this occurred, and again in the 70s, and they had been in France traveling. They were friends traveling, and they had ended up visiting a restaurant that wasn't there the next day. And they said it had been very stormy the previous night. So there are things like this that go on along with our own cases. So it's again another area that has been very neglected and needs to be studied further, and we're trying to do that. You're muted, really.
Sorry about that. Is it possible for people to be carriers of time flaps? Example, like someone with trauma, like the Holocaust survivor in the photograph.
That's a very interesting question, and that's come up in the context of Skinwalker Ranch. If you're familiar with that case, and I think everybody is, and there have been claims, and which I don't disbelieve, that pretty much anybody who goes there and spends any amount of time will be a carrier and will come back, and their families will start having weird things happen. Neighbors will start having strange things happen. And even people who come into contact with them will. Now that really rings a bell when it comes to what we've just said in flap areas, that whole neighborhoods are affected by things like the Bridgeport poltergeist case, when Bill Hall wrote his book, The World's Most Haunted House, the first book written on that case, other than a couple of things I'd written, I said, see if you can find out from anybody who was in the area at the time if they had weird stuff going on in their house, and they did. So whether a person is actually a carrier is a question that is fraught with peril. In some of the research done at Skinwalker Ranch, it has been referred to as almost a virus that is carried by people who experience this stuff. I think it might be something different. We usually think, in a different way about these things, that once one has an awareness, I mean, in our opinion, these things are around us all the time. And the awareness that people have is affected by what is going on and vice versa. So I think that when we have people who are aware, they will spread the awareness of it. And these things that are going on, I think, again, all the time around us, but we're not aware of them because we're too busy or whatever. On the other hand, I don't know if that really does it. Ben, what are your thoughts on carriers and the spreading of this kind of thing?
Well, trauma in and of itself is a really fascinating phenomena that there's really there wasn't a ton of study done on it until very recently. And the really breakthrough sort of study on this, and probably the most popular book on it, would be The Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk, who really did a really in-depth study and really did a lot of work on PTSD, especially people who were, they went through wars or were abused or anything like that. And there's a really interesting sort of phenomena that comes in with that, because a psychologist friend of mine told me once that, stress or trauma will come out, it will manifest in some way, shape, or form. And I think we really downplay ourselves in the phenomena in and of itself, not to get too into the whole parapsychology thing, but we do play a part in it, and what we bring to the environment will affect it, right? It's like that old saying that what you bring to it is what you get out of it. And it's especially true with people who have been through some really traumatic stuff. And I can think of some cases that we've had with parasites where people who were involved were abused, or there was some sort of negative thing happening in the family. Now, I don't know if the term would be thinking, you carry the phenomena with you. I think it's important to note that anywhere this stuff can happen. It can happen anywhere, and the whole world is haunted. And I think on the individual level and how we experience it, it's really important to realize that we play a part in it, whether it's our traumas or stresses, anything in that realm. It will be used or be a part of the phenomenon in some way, shape, or form, especially if it's, if it's negative, if it's positive. Not to put it in really simplistic terms, because the human experience can't be just, negative, positive. It's a whole spectrum of things. I think that's a really interesting question, especially since, how we experience it, or the past experiences we've had, affect us and stay with us, especially how we remember things, the good and the bad. And especially if it gets brought out in a paranormal sense, or even just in an experiential way, where we have this environment and we bring something to it, which I don't know if that quite answers the question, but I think we do bring something to the environment. Whether we carry the flap with us, I don't know. What I can say is we bring something to the environment rather than taking the environment with us.
And one of the more obvious, before leaving that question, is it possible to pick up an entity that attaches itself to you, and then you take it home with you? Yes, we've seen that many different occasions. The question is, what is the entity? Like in that Bridgeport house, I began to think of these, what we thought were demons, as alien. That's what they felt like. And that's what I approached pretty much ever since. So it's very possible to pick up an entity and take it home. And then in the Skinwalker Ranch case, that may well be what happened.
Is there, because my two kids, they're like big fans now. They're really, like, I think I told you, Paul,
Yeah.
that my kids want to be apprentices to you, junior paranormal investigators. They've been watching, Skinwalker Ranch with me on History Channel. They've been following Sam and Colby on YouTube. They got millions of followers. They're like, paranormal investigators and stuff. One thing they asked me, and I always refer, well, Paul Eno says, Paul and Ben Eno say, one thing is like, because we went and visited Fairfield Hills in Newtown, and that's one of the most haunted places in Connecticut. And they were wondering, because they know not to pick up something there, like a piece of stone or something like that, because they know from what they've seen, you can bring something back. Is there something, aside from not picking up an actual physical object, what can you do to protect yourself if you're visiting an area of high strangeness?
Well, probably the best answer is not to visit it. Ben made some really good points about, things you bring. I think if the feral ghost hunters, as we call them, the people who do it as a hobby and take it too lightly, will go into areas like this, and we're always hearing that they've picked us something up. In some cases, it has even wrecked their lives. I can give you examples of that. So it's like walking into a nuclear reactor area without proper training or clothing or any other, or running across a busy highway. It's dumb to do it, and you can really get pancaked. When it comes to the paranormal investigation, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go to places like that. And there's a sort of spiritual discipline that we suggest, which involves a great deal of focus, strength, gathering of energy, positive nature of your own attitude. That's very important, and we don't have time to get into it here, but I would say the best way to avoid that kind of thing is not to do it. Whatever. I remember your children are tremendously. I remember in 2017, Aurelio, we did a book debut for our book on cryptids, Behind the Paranormal 2, Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters You Never Heard of, at the Danbury Library. And Luca, who was 3 years old, your son, this could not stop asking questions, and they were good questions. So I vividly understand how interested he is, but I would be cautious. Talk to us first.
I will. And he, and there is a moment, he's a little kid. He's, right now he shares a room with his sister, and we're about to, we're working on his own room right now. But sometimes at bedtime, he gets a little scared. If there's sometimes I feel there's a ghost coming. I'm like, no, Daddy and Grandpa built this house. There's no ghosts and everything like that. But if he gets a little scared, I said, what does Paul Eno say if there's a ghost or something like that? He always says, tell it a joke. So
something like
so sometimes at night he starts just doing like one-liners like Eddie Youngman.
Yeah, positive thinking.
That's what it is. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the positive thinking, and he's very focused, and he doesn't get himself rattled, or my daughter as well. They get themselves very focused. They're very good, studious kids and everything. But, just know that, we always have Paul and Ben, if there's any sort of questions, and they're very happy. Oh, Ben, you wanted to add something, right?
I did, but Peter Shelley down in the chat asked a question.
Okay, thank you. So question, there was a case called Kingbird 50, which was an alleged time slip. A mysterious US bomber supposedly approached Thule Air Force Base in Greenland in the early 2000s. This was during a storm and communications with the control tower. The plane crashed and was found with a dead crew in the 1940s military uniforms, and bomber was of the same era. Anything to this story, or was it just science fiction?
I'm not wildly familiar with it, but I've heard the details. I sort of had some doubts about that. Now it's entirely plausible, but it always struck me, again, not knowing a lot of the primary sources about this case, it struck me as kind of science fiction. Now, on the other hand, there are plenty of examples of pilots reporting seeing the scenes on the ground. I'm thinking of one particular one in England. I don't have it at my fingertips, but the pilot saw almost like it was a modern flight, 1980s or so, and saw World War II scene on the bottom, but it would have been older Spitfires on an older runway and that kind of thing. And of course, whatever you have stories like that from one witness, you just don't know. I'm much more interested in stories where you have multiple witnesses, and this supposedly had multiple witnesses, the one Peter is referring to. But there are a lot of hoops these things have to jump through, in my opinion. And the cases we mentioned in our presentation have done that according to our research. But it's very iffy, a lot of this stuff. But possible.
Understood. So let's end this because we need to transition over to Tom Reed's presentation. But again, thank you so much, Paul and Ben. You're always enlightening, and you blow my mind each time with your thoughtful and in-depth presentations. And thank you so much again. And we'd love to see you back here at the UFO conference next year, and to have you here at the Danbury Library once your latest book, Behind the Paranormal 3 Uneasy Skies, gets published. So thank you once again, Paul and Ben Eno. And on behalf of the Danbury Library, we're going to take a break for 15 minutes while we go ahead and